thanks to Walk, thanks to Inma, thanks to all of you who have invited me, those of you who have given me the opportunity to come speak with you here in Barcelona. It's a pleasure to be back after 2 or 3 years, and it's also a pleasure to see some colleagues that I haven't seen in a number of years. I had the great opportunity, 2010, 2011, to work with IN3 as a faculty fellow there, as a research fellow. And the work I'm going to talk about today evolves directly out of those projects. About 2 years ago, 2012, I was here in Barcelona collecting data from Spanish entrepreneurs, and that coordinates with Chinese entrepreneurs and American entrepreneurs. And what we're doing is comparative international entrepreneurship research. And what I'm going to talk about today evolves from that research with both Inma and Gisela and some other folks who aren't here. So again, thanks to everybody for giving me the opportunity to come here. And thanks to the entrepreneurs. Do we have some entrepreneurs in the room, or aspiring entrepreneurs? I'm not sure if those folks are going to be here. Well, if you're out there in Cyberland, welcome and thanks to you. Okay, a quiz. Who are these guys? We all know them, right? Gates, Jobs, Ortega, and Zuckerberg. And these 4 guys are who we ordinarily think of when we think of entrepreneurs. My point today is to talk about the hero myth in entrepreneurship. Because, generally speaking, when people think of entrepreneurs, they think of people like these 4, the gods, the billionaires, the people who have started businesses that we all know, Microsoft, Apple, Zara, and Facebook, game changers, absolute game changers. And when I ask students, when I ask folks who aren't entrepreneurs, who do you think about? Always, almost always, it comes back to one of these folks. Now, here's another quiz. How about these guys? Anybody know these 3? Yeah, great. Jonas Fries. He's the founder of Skype. The guy all the way on the left is Jonas Fries. How about the middle one? Any guesses? This is a guy named Wayne Huizinga, and he's the founder of a gigantic, huge company called Waste Management, garbage company in the United States. Also the founder of Blockbuster Video, now bankrupt, but had a good run for a while. Also the founder of a company called AutoNation, owner of the Miami Dolphins football team, American football team, owner of the Florida Marlins baseball team. So not very famous, but also worth about $4 billion. And the last guy, anybody recognize that fellow? Very important for your everyday life. This is a man you probably curse every day without knowing it. His name is Omar Hamoui. He's a Middle Eastern entrepreneur who created a company called AdMob. When you open your Angry Birds, when you're in line, and you see an advertisement in an app, that's his fault. He created the company called AdMob and then sold it to a company called Google for close to $1 billion. So again, 3 entrepreneurs that nobody thinks of, but are extremely, extremely important. But again, these are folks that we don't know about, but they're the rare ones. These are the ones who I'm going to say are freaks. They're the outliers, more politely. So Gates, Jobs, Ortega, Zuckerberg, Fries, Huizinga, and Hamoui, these guys are freaks. They're freaks because they're the 0.00006% of the world that has created $1 billion business. Most of us will never, ever, ever do that. And in fact, I would argue most of us don't want to do that. Most of us probably are not interested in the type of workload that these men have created. And probably most of us are interested in things other than money. And so what I'm going to talk about today are real people, real entrepreneurs with real values that emerged from the research that we've done. And so let me introduce these 3 real people who aren't freaks. Outliers, better word. So 3 people. I'm going to slide this over here. First is Drew. These names are invented. Okay, these are not their real names. This is Drew. Drew is an engineer, civil engineer, works with a company, one of only 2 companies in the entire world that does large-scale modeling for water systems. So when Seoul, South Korea, wanted to create a new water management system, waste treatment system, they called Drew. Pardon. Drew. He's a personal friend of mine, and so it's hard not to use his real name. So they called Drew. He has projects in Madrid, he has projects in South America, he has projects all over the United States. He has a huge facility that is, bigger than a football field, where he builds these models of large water systems. How about Maria, Spanish woman? And Maria is an engineer also, but Maria works with electrical engineering. She runs a small company in Barcelona, I think it's Barcelona, yeah, in Barcelona, and works with video and other sorts of electronic engineering. And she was one of our participants. And then from China, let me introduce Wu. Wu is involved in all sorts of different projects. Primarily, he came out of electrical engineering, working with large American companies like Honeywell, Johnson Controls, but also Siemens, a German company. But now does work with real estate development, with construction, other sorts of things. Each of these 3 are real people, people whom we've talked with, people who have real stories. And we're going to come back to these 3 to hear their stories after I talk for just a few minutes about the hero myth. And where does the hero myth come from? Because the hero myth is very, very powerful. Very, very powerful in entrepreneurship, very, very powerful specifically in Western culture. Less in Eastern and Asian cultures, but in the West, it's extremely powerful. And it's extremely dangerous in many ways, I'll argue, because for those of us who want to start businesses, those of us who are entrepreneurs, it's almost deflating to think about Zuckerberg or Gates and think, I can never do that. That's why I want to point out that those men, mostly men, are by large accounts, the outliers. I'm also going to argue that isolation doesn't work, because along with the hero myth is the idea that I can do it by myself. I'm American, and there's no place in the world probably that has more of a sense I can do it by myself than the United States. But in fact, our research has shown that the folks even in Spain and China have thought, I can do this by myself. But the research says, no, you don't. Even Zuckerberg, Gates, Jobs, they didn't do it by themselves. Then I'll talk about our stories. And then I'm going to leave with a couple ideas about practical wisdom, some steps for entrepreneurs to take that can help them succeed. So first, where does it come from? Where does this hero myth come from in the West? Well, first of all, it comes from literature. That's a statue of Odysseus on the left. And in Greek culture, in Western culture, we have a we pride ourselves, we really value these great people who go out and they overcome these great challenges and they emerge as these heroes, and they're really interesting. We love to hear their stories. The second one is religion. Whether you believe it or not, whether you're a Christian or not, think about religion. My frame as an American comes out of Christianity. And so if you think about the heroes of the Bible, going all the way back, Moses, Abraham, King David, all of them, all the way through Christ, they're all heroes. They're all heroes. And they're all individuals who go through a pattern that I'm going to talk about in just a minute. And we really value them. We look up to these folks in large part. So religion is a key source of the hero myth. And then finally, media. I love Star Wars. I love Star Wars. The original Star Wars, not the new ones. The original 3. This one, Return of the Jedi, and Empire Strikes Back. The original Star Wars. So here's Luke Skywalker, right? Luke Skywalker is the same, runs through the same thing. So we have 3 sources of this that are all sort of mythical. My apologies to those of you who might be religious. I happen to believe the Bible is a great piece of literature. Some of it's true, some of it might not be, I'm not quite sure. But that's just my perspective. And so there's a fellow, some of you might know, who wrote a book called, Joseph Campbell, wrote a book called A Hero with a Thousand Faces. Very, very influential book in literary studies in English languages. And he maps this trajectory of the hero. And he basically says it's an archetype. It is something that in literature, in stories, in mythology, repeats itself over and over and over. And essentially, the same pattern happens in every story, and it happens in entrepreneurship. So what happens? We have a hero, a character. That person is called to adventure, called to action by some belief that they can do something. There's a problem. I've got to solve this problem. I've got to overcome it. They're compelled to do something. And they travel through a series of events. They travel through a series of trials and tribulations, and they descend into hell. They ascend, and they're remade at the end. So again, this is why, you can hopefully see the connection, especially with the resurrection story from the Bible. You can see it with Odysseus. You can see it with Luke Skywalker. And you can even see it with Darth Vader, who happens to be my favorite character from Star Wars, Darth Vader. The most interesting character because he's the most well-developed. So he has power, he solves a problem, he descends into hell, doubts him or herself, goes through a series of transformations, and then emerges as something new, powerful, and an idol, something to look up to. And then on the right side is a similar path. And you see down at the bottom, this is the place that a lot of entrepreneurs end. Entrepreneurship is hard. It's hard. For anybody who's ever started a business, we've all arrived at the point where we say, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. This is horrible. I'm eating noodles. I'm drinking bad coffee. This is terrible. I don't want to do this anymore. And that's the pit. Anybody who started a business has arrived there, and it's very difficult to get over that. One thing that's interesting about this, though, is that what you can't really see in this picture is what's in those red circles. Is the helpers, is the mentors, is the network, is all of the people along the way who have helped these mythical entrepreneurs, these heroes. Nobody has done it by themselves. This is an important thing that a lot of entrepreneurs, especially young entrepreneurs, forget, is that you can't do it alone. And in fact, if you try to do it alone, you're probably not going to succeed. You're probably going to fail. And so what does the research say about this? First, the research says, and this comes from an article by Huang and Anton Sik, I'm not sure I'm saying his name correctly. However, what the research says is that it depends on where you are in your stage and where your process. So there's a 4-step model here, and there's people who talk about entrepreneurship processes. Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 4. But essentially what happens is at each step of the process, you're engaged with a number of people. So at the very beginning, you're kind of thinking about your project. You're saying, maybe I should start a business. I've identified this opportunity. I've identified this problem. Maybe I should start a business. And at this stage, you're talking mostly to friends and family. And you're probably talking, on average, to about 8 people. You're not doing it alone. So you're talking to about 8 people. And then you make a decision, okay, I'm going to move forward and start my business. Now we're talking to about 15 people on average. We're talking to our team. We're getting people together who are domain experts. We're getting legal advice. We're talking to accountants, all of the people necessary to build a business. And then there comes a moment between step 2 and 3 where we actually start a business. Okay? I've got everything I need. I'm going to do it. I'm going to build this business. Now we're talking to about 12 people. I'm actively in my business. I'm growing my business. And then the final step in this is essentially growing. Now I'm talking about average of 12 and a half people. Along the way, though, at each phase, I'm engaging lots of people. And these are probably cumulative numbers, meaning that by the time I'm at the end, I'm talking to 12 plus 15 plus 8 people. So my network is now 40, 45 people, 50 people that I'm talking to about my business. So that's part 1, is the stage where you are matters. And we'll come back to that. The second is that gender matters. Not surprisingly, women talk to more men, talk to more people than men do. And so gender matters, and so female entrepreneurs, on average, talk to more people than men do. And we're starting to see in the United States at least, women are outpacing men in the startup and the success of new businesses. And I would argue that a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're willing to network more than men are. Last one is that nationality matters. So this is a study that comes from a comparative analysis of networks in at least these 3 different countries: the United States, Sweden, and Italy. And I point this out for a couple of reasons. One is that in the United States, family is not engaged with entrepreneurship. We talk to our families at the beginning, but that's as far as it goes. Families aren't really part of our professional networks. And for those of you who are not American, this isn't a surprise. We separate business and our family life. There's a line between the two. They're not the same. Then, in Northern Europe context, 28% family. So Northern Europeans, and in this particular study they were talking about Sweden, it's more common to have a larger percentage of your network be your family. And now in Southern Europe, 57% would be family. So why is this important? It's important because the diversity of a network is directly correlated to the success of a business. Now, that isn't to say that if you have a smaller network, you're not going to succeed. But statistically, the likelihood of success increases with the diversity of your network. And in the United States, I will just go out on a limb and argue that we're really good at starting businesses. That's part of our culture. And it's part of our heritage in the United States. And I'm not sure that it correlates directly to our separation of family, but it does correlate with our willingness to engage with people and to talk with people, which is an interesting paradox in the United States. I started by saying there's fewer countries that are more individualistic than the United States. But paradoxically, the Americans will talk to the most people whom they don't know, which is very interesting. So what does the research say? Networks matter. For those of us in the room, this isn't a surprise, right? This isn't a surprise. Networks do matter. However, for a lot of young entrepreneurs especially who want to guard their ideas closely, it's an important realization. It's important sometimes to state the obvious, that networks do matter. So let's talk a little bit about our research. So here's Drew. Drew is an American, civil engineer, and his parents were entrepreneurs, sort of. They were small business owners. And there is a difference between small business owners and entrepreneurs. They're not the same. But his parents were sort of failed entrepreneurs. They always were trying to start new businesses and never quite succeeded. But Dave developed the spirit from a young age that I'm going to have my own business. And in fact, he did have his own business at a very young age. He would go to the junkyard, which is where cars go to die, take pieces of cars, put new cars together, sell new cars, buy new cars, basically by building new cars out of old cars. Along the way, he received support from influential professors. And so Drew, I'm going to do that a bunch of times. I hope nobody knows him. But along the way, he received support from lots of influential professors. And so he has a PhD, a doctorate in civil engineering. Worked in industry for a while and developed relationships that he carried then into his academic life. Those relationships then translated into his professional life when he decided to leave the university. He became frustrated with how slow universities move and the constraints that the university put on his entrepreneurial spirit, and left and took all of his clients, all of his business with him. Happens a lot in American education institutions. But he leveraged those academic relationships into new clients. He leveraged his business heritage into new clients. He leveraged his professional considerations into new clients. And now he relies 100% on relationships and recommendations for new business. He doesn't advertise. And again, he's one of 2 businesses in the entire world, as of the time of our research, that's doing what he's doing. He has more business than he can possibly handle. He's turning it away because in the United States and other countries, infrastructure is aging. And so they're building new infrastructure. However, if you ask Dave, he'll tell you he did it all by himself. yes, a lot of his narrative, and this is a narrative methodology that we're using here, a lot of his narrative is about I did this, I did this, I did this, I did that. But when you read closely through his story, you see, no, Dave, you really didn't. This person gave you that opportunity. That person introduced you to this person. It was about the network. But curiously, he says, I did it all myself, as a proper American would. Now here's Maria. Maria is an interesting comparison because Maria, as a Spanish person, a Catalan woman, actively seeks mentorship. She talks at length about how she participates in networking activities, how much she likes to build networks. She talks about her partners, her business partners. She talks about not growing her firm beyond a certain size. She talks about balance in her life more. And she talks about how difficult it is to compete with men. And so Maria, in her business, has spent a lot of time actually developing her networks. Again, remember that gender matters. And Maria is an example of gender mattering because she is a person in her narratives who, yes, she does some pretty amazing things. And she talks about doing some pretty amazing things. She was in line to become a female astronaut in the EU. It's pretty impressive. Very impressive thing that she was doing. And so she talks at length about her activities, but they're always nested in, we did this. They're always nested in a place where it was involved with a group, and she's much more interested in engaging with a group. So she's a second case, and she's a middle road between Dave, Drew, and I should just give him his real name, Drew, and one of our Chinese participants named Wu. Chinese culture, as you might know, is very group-oriented. They have a concept called guanxi, which is about interrelationships and family relationships, and there's nested relationships and who can speak with whom, and it's historically a group-oriented culture. And so Wu talks, and all of our Chinese participants talk at great length about their engagement with society. And they talk about their businesses as serving society. They talk about their businesses as meeting needs of society. They talk about how they're willing to accept less profit to keep people employed. And so we did our research, collected our data right after the financial crisis. So this is 2011, 2012. And a lot of people were suffering. And so it was very interesting to hear the Chinese entrepreneurs in particular saying, it really matters that I was able to accept smaller profits but still keep people employed. That would never happen in the United States, and didn't happen in the United States. But what's interesting, though, about Wu is he criticizes the notion of guanxi. And he says he absolutely does not trust others. That's a direct quote. And so there's an interesting shift happening in Chinese entrepreneurship, and this isn't just with him, but with some others as well, that maybe there's this Western influence on the Chinese culture and saying, I'm not sure that I trust other people. He, interestingly enough, also thinks a large part that he did it by himself. And so he's a really obvious paradox that he's talking about Chinese culture and how the culture enabled him, his responsibility to culture, but he never wanted to involve anybody else. He felt like he had to. So it's interesting people, and so each one of them shows a different side of this hero myth. Dave is the best embodiment of the hero. Maria, not so much. Not so much. She represents more of a middle ground. And Wu comes out of a culture that doesn't have the hero myth, yet is developing the hero myth. So each one of these is important in terms of thinking about the hero myth and its role in entrepreneurship. So I want to end by talking about what I think are 3 steps to success, 3 steps to overcoming the hero myth. First, and these are directed more toward entrepreneurs themselves. Know where you are. As an entrepreneur, it's important to know what stage of development you're in. And each one of those steps requires different types of people. So in the first step, in thinking about it, it's probably family and friends. And that's probably where you're going to receive your initial investment, from family and friends. And so it's important to engage them at the earlier stages. And then if you're in the planning stage, you've decided you're going to move forward, probably. Now we're starting to talk to domain experts. We're recruiting our team. We're building a group around us of knowledge experts, of people who are technology experts, whatever your business might be. We're talking to accountants, talking to lawyers, talking to lots of different people. But it's a different network of people. But that doesn't mean that you throw away your family. So now you have your family, plus this new network. And then as you're building, now I'm talking to clients. I'm talking to suppliers. I'm building my supply chain. A whole different set of people. But again, we've got my supply chain, the accountants, the lawyers. I'm hiring human resources professionals. I'm building my expertise. And this is particularly important in the realm of creative entrepreneurship, I think, because probably this is the place where creative entrepreneurs need the most help. They're really good at their craft, but not so good at human resources law. They're not so good at accounting, because that's not the expertise. And so here's where we have to develop that expertise. And then, of course, growing. Now we're talking to different suppliers. Maybe we're talking about partnerships. Maybe we're building relationships with new businesses. Maybe we're talking about selling our business. Maybe we're talking about buying a building or renting a space. Different relationships. And so networking matters depending upon where you are. But notice you can't do it all by yourself. And second is know what you need. So each one of these steps requires different sorts of help, support. So if you're at the first stage, you really kind of need support. And you need support along the way, because if you remember the journey of a hero, or an entrepreneur, we're all going to land in that valley where we think we can't do it. And it's important to have that person there to say, yeah, you can. You can do this. You can do this. The people who provide us emotional support. And I can't underestimate that enough. It's hard. Entrepreneurship is hard. And so we need that support. And then there are three other things: markets, expertise, and capital. I'll talk more about this a little bit tomorrow. But these are three things that are always important in entrepreneurship: access to markets, access to capital, and access to expertise. Access to capital, money. Money. And so if you're building your business and starting your business, you have to know where the money is, because starting a business costs money. Running a business costs money. And so we have to know where to find that capital and what type of capital. What are its restrictions? Expertise sort of falls in the building stage. If I'm in a creative arts environment, I'm probably going to need some expertise outside of digital design, outside of marketing. Who are those people that I need to help me grow my business? And markets, access to markets. There are people who have networks, who have access to markets. Those are the people we need to be talking to as we're growing our business. I don't have access to certain markets. I need to find the people who do and introduce myself. And last, and this is a challenge, I think, in many contexts, because people don't want to talk a lot of times about what it is that they do. They're sort of shy. And my experience, limited as it is, in a Southern European context, is this is especially a challenge in Southern Europe, where people are not willing to talk about what it is that they do. What do you do? Oh, I'm in the marketing business. People aren't willing as in the United States to say, I'm an entrepreneur. I started my own business. And so the question here is, talk to everybody. And again, let me just be honest. I mean, I'm coming at this from an American perspective. And I say, talk to everybody. Anybody who will listen. Every time you're in an elevator, every conference you go to, every party you go to, people ask what you're doing. You say, I started a business. Here's what I'm doing. I'm working with this business that does this. 30 seconds, we all know about the elevator pitch. We all know about the 30-second speech. That is incredibly important, because what it shows is that this is who you are and you're compassionate about it. Also, attend networking meetings. I know in Barcelona there's Barcelona Activa. In other places there are other types of things. There's chambers of commerce. I'm not sure what the corollary is to that in Southern Europe. But there are business groups. Actively work with those business groups. And this is a challenge, especially for creative professionals, because a lot of creative professionals don't want to do that type of activity. But, as the research says, you're much more likely to succeed if you network. And you're much more likely to gain access to markets and to capital if people know what you do. Talk to customers now. Most of you are probably familiar with the lean startup model. And in the lean startup model, what we do is we get outside of the building and we go talk to people. You might think that you have the most fantastic idea for a business. But if the market has no taste for what you are doing, you have no business. And better to know that at the beginning than after you've invested years and thousands of dollars in starting a business. So get outside the building, talk to people. Finally, it's important to realize that we all, as entrepreneurs, are very invested in our ideas. We think that we're super. We think that we are fantastic. And we think that the world should come to us because we have this great idea, money should come to me. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. The world is very competitive. The world isn't going to come to us because we think we're awesome. Our job is to go out and talk to other people and tell them how awesome we are, to build our networks so that we can have access to markets, to capital, to expertise. And so my final question, and what I want to leave us with, is what's stopping you? What's stopping you as an entrepreneur from building your network? And with that question, I'll end, and we can have a conversation. Thanks.